So once kids are familiar with the base 10 blocks and they've had time to explore, um, develop generalizations about base 10 blocks, and they're comfortable with it, then what I like to do is that I like to start setting boundaries and start working with writing down numbers, um, and developing place value concepts. Now in front of me here is it's a base 10 chart, and again they have like the visual representations of flats, hundreds, rods which are tens, and units which are ones. And you'll notice like there are lines, um, kind of separating the place values. And when I introduce the concept to kids, I just introduce it as each of the base 10 blocks have a certain place. Units belong in the units column, rods belong in the rods column, and flats belong in the flats column. Very simple, very straightforward. So if I'm working with kids, I start with the units, and I'll ask them, how many units do we have? They'll count and they'll say 3, right? So just write down 3. And what I might do is I might just take that away, wipe this off. Put down maybe 2 rods, and I'll ask them, how many rods do I have now? How many blocks do I have? How many flats, how many rods, how many units? And they might say, well, no flats, 2 rods, and they might not say anything about units. So you just want to ask them, how many units do we have? And they might say none, 0, right? And just put 0 units. And then what you'll do is, again, you'll take away the rods, you'll erase. I want to use an actual eraser instead of your fingers. And then you'll do the same thing with the flats. And we'll put like 2 down over here. And again, what we'll do is we'll ask them, how many flats do we have? And they'll say 1, 2. So we have 2 flats. And then we'll ask them, how many rods? No rods. How many units? 0 units. So just get them familiar with the idea of using the mat. And when you're using the mat, you're writing down how many flats you have, how many rods you have, how many units you have, and saying that the number is 200. And that's a very basic step before you go any further into addition and subtraction. I feel like just having kids practice with this is very important. The next thing that we can do after this is we can practice giving them numbers. So what we'll do is, now that we've done a little intro, we'll put a couple of flats, a couple of rods, a couple of units, and we'll just start. How many units do we have? We have 3 units. How many rods do we have? We have 1 rod. How many flats do we have? We have 1 flat. Alright, and the number is 113. 113. Very basic. And now what you might want to do with kids is take turns making numbers. Now, once kids have started to play with the chart and explore numbers and make numbers, I think an interesting activity for kids to do is to make up numbers and have adults play along and try to guess that number on the base 10 chart. And likewise, have um, the adults make a number and have the kid, have the child or student, write the number out and try to guess the number in that way. Now, these kind of activities, I probably wouldn't do too long. Um, just introducing the kid to it for a few minutes, maybe 5, 10 minutes. I think anything longer than that, you'll probably see the kid start to lose interest. So I think just getting the student to recognize the use of the base 10 chart, I think that's important, especially when we start doing addition and subtraction. So they're starting to get familiarized with, where to place the units, the rods, and the flats, and how we write down numbers. Um, Now, when we create these numbers, when we start working with the base 10 chart, there is an important rule that I forgot to mention, but it's something that really should be emphasized to kids at this point when we're first introducing the chart. It's what I like to call the trade-in rule, and the trade-in rule is something that we'll explore in later lessons. But basically, the trade-in rule is once you have 10 of any one piece, you trade into the next higher item. So for example, if we have, let's see, if we have 10 units, right, what we do when we have 10 units is what we'll do is we'll trade in those 10 units for one rod. Or if we had 10 rods, what we do, let's see, this is 4, 8, 10. So we have 10 rods, what we do is we trade in these 10 rods for one flat. We put that in the flat column. The reason why I mention it now is, sometimes when you're making numbers, kids will take a whole bunch of units, right, and they'll throw it in, and, and while, there are a whole bunch of units, it won't work, with what we're trying to do. So that's just something to kind of, have in mind when you're working with units, rods, and flats. So if it does come up, you can either have them use less units, less rods, and less flats for each, or what you could do is you could tell them there's a rule. You have to use less than 10 units, rods, or flats in each. But I wouldn't get too much into it, because there's a rule later, and we'll play a game that will really teach them the trade-in rule.